The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday, taped to the apartment door, with the kind of aggressive permanness that suggested the landlord had used an entire roll. Mira Kahn stood in the hallway of the Providence Street complex, her 9-year-old daughter Layla pressed against her side, both of them staring at the document like it might disappear if they wished hard enough. 72-hour notice. Final warning. Failure to vacate will result in forcible removal and legal action. The words blurred together. Mira had known this was coming for 6 weeks, ever since the nursing agency cut her hours and the childcare costs ate through what remained of her paycheck. She'd managed to negotiate extensions twice before, but the building had been sold to new ownership, and the new owner had no patience for single mothers with excuses and promises. Layla's voice was small, careful. "Where are we going to go?" The question hung in the September air, while Phoenix heat radiated off the pavement, even at 7 o'clock in the evening. Mira had no answer. Her sister's couch was occupied by her sister's boyfriend, who'd made it clear there was no room for refugees. The women's shelter had a 6-week waiting list. Her car had been repossessed 3 months ago. "We'll figure something out." The lie tasted familiar. She'd been telling versions of it since Layla's father left 5 years ago, disappearing into whatever hole men crawled into when responsibility became inconvenient. They went inside. The apartment was already half-packed. Mira had been preparing for this inevitability, even while hoping it wouldn't arrive. Boxes lined the walls, containing everything they owned that mattered. Clothes, books, Layla's collection of rocks she'd gathered from every park in Phoenix, each one labeled with the date and location in careful 9-year-old handwriting. Mira's phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, had learned that unknown numbers meant collection agencies or scammers, neither of which improved her situation. But something made her swipe to accept. "Is this Mira Kahn?" The voice was female, professional, with an accent Mira couldn't place. British maybe, or something close to it. "Who's asking?" "My name is Farah Desai. I'm a solicitor with Desai and Partners in London. I've been trying to reach you for 8 months regarding your grandmother's estate." Mira's mind went blank. "My grandmother died when I was 12. Your other grandmother, Parvin Kahn, your father's mother." The name triggered memories Mira had buried deliberately. Parvin, the woman her father rarely mentioned, who lived somewhere in Central Asia, who sent letters in languages Mira couldn't read, who'd visited once when Mira was 7 and filled their house with the smell of cardamom and stories about places that sounded like fever dreams. "She died 2 years ago," Farah continued. "The estate has been in probate due to complications with property located in Uzbekistan. International inheritance law, particularly involving historical structures, is complex." Mira sat down slowly on the edge of the couch. Layla watched with the hyper-awareness of children who'd learned to read adult stress levels for survival information. "What does this have to do with me? You're listed as her sole heir. Your father predeceased her by 3 years, which transfers his inheritance rights to you." The room felt smaller. Mira's father had died of a heart attack in a Las Vegas casino, alone, surrounded by strangers. She'd learned about it from a county coroner who'd tracked her down through social services. She hadn't attended the funeral because she couldn't afford the bus ticket and because grief required energy she didn't have. What did she leave? Farah's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering news they expected to disappoint. "A structure in the Fergana Valley. Historical designation, which complicated the transfer. The Uzbek government required extensive documentation proving your lineage. A structure. Not money, not stocks, not anything that could pay rent or buy food. A building in a country Mira couldn't locate on a map. What kind of structure? The records describe it as a caravanserai, a Silk Road way station. It's been abandoned for decades, possibly centuries. The local municipality has condemned portions of it as structurally unsafe." Mira's laugh came out sharp. "So, I inherited a condemned building in Uzbekistan." "Technically, yes, but the inheritance is legally valid. I have documents requiring your signature to complete the transfer." "What happens if I don't sign?" "The property reverts to the Uzbek state. They'll likely demolish it for safety reasons." Mira looked around her apartment, at the eviction notice on the counter. at Layla sitting cross-legged on the floor, pretending to read, but clearly listening to every word. At the boxes that contained everything they owned and the windows that showed a city where they had nowhere to go. Send me the documents. She signed them 2 days later at a FedEx print shop, her signature witnessed by a bored employee who seemed annoyed that the process required actual attention. Farah had included a property deed with text in English and Uzbek, plus a letter from the Fergana Valley Municipal Office stating that the structure was located 12 kilometers from the town of Marjolin, accessible by unpaved road, no utilities, no recent occupancy records. The packet also included 3 photographs that looked like they'd been taken with a phone from a significant distance. Stone walls, partially collapsed. A courtyard filled with debris. An arched gateway that had somehow remained standing despite everything around it deteriorating. Layla studied the photos with the intensity she brought to everything that might represent change. It looks really old. It is. Are we going there? The question should have been absurd. They had no money for international travel. Mira had never left the United States. She spoke exactly 3 words of her father's language, all of them food-related. But they had 48 hours before the sheriff arrived to enforce the eviction. They had nowhere else to go. And something in Mira's chest that had been compressed for 5 years suddenly found space to expand. She pulled up flights on her phone. Phoenix to Tashkent via Istanbul. $1,847 for 2 people. The number was impossible. She had $340 in her checking account. Layla's voice was quiet. Mom, how'll we get there? Mira stared at her phone, at the photos of the ruined caravanserai, at her daughter who deserved stability and safety and all the things Mira couldn't provide in Phoenix. She opened her credit card app, the one card she hadn't maxed out yet. Available credit, $2,100. Using it for flights would be financial suicide. Would trap her in debt she'd never escape. Would be the kind of desperate decision people made when they'd run out of rational options. She booked the tickets. They left Phoenix with 2 suitcases and Layla's backpack full of labeled rocks. The TSA agent looked at their boarding passes with confusion that shifted to something like pity when she saw the destination. Mira had Googled Uzbekistan during the layover in Istanbul, learning that it was landlocked, hot, mountainous in some regions and desert in others, formerly part of the Soviet Union, known for silk production and Islamic architecture and a history of being conquered by basically everyone who passed through Central Asia. The Fergana Valley was agricultural, conservative, poor by Western standards, but stable compared to neighboring regions. The photos showed mountains in the distance, fields of cotton and wheat, towns that looked like they'd been built in stages over centuries with Soviet-era concrete sitting beside medieval mosques. Layla slept through most of the flight from Istanbul, her head on Mira's shoulder, small body radiating the trust that children gave to parents who had no idea what they were doing. Mira stayed awake, watching the sun rise over landscapes that shifted from green to brown to the impossible blue of the Caspian Sea. They landed in Tashkent at 11 a.m. local time. The airport was modern, almost aggressively so, glass and steel, trying very hard to project progress and stability. Signs in Uzbek and Russian with occasional English translations. Immigration officers who processed their passports with the bored efficiency of people who saw stranger things daily than an American woman and her daughter arriving with no return tickets and no clear plan. The bus to Fergana Valley left from the Tashkent long-distance terminal, a chaotic building that smelled of diesel and bread and humanity compressed into 2 small spaces. Mira bought tickets from a window where the clerk spoke no English, and she spoke no Uzbek. The transaction conducted entirely through hand gestures and the display of increasingly large denomination psalm notes until the clerk nodded and printed tickets. The bus was older than Layla, its seats worn smooth by decades of passengers. They sat in the back near a woman with 3 chickens in a cage and a man who spent the entire 6-hour journey listening to music through headphones that leaked tinny sound. The landscape outside transformed gradually. Tashkent's urban sprawl thinned into agricultural land. Fields stretched toward mountains that grew larger and more dramatic as they moved east. The road climbed steadily, following river valleys, passing through towns that looked like they existed in multiple centuries simultaneously. Soviet apartment blocks next to traditional mahallas with their cluster courtyards. Mosques with turquoise domes catching afternoon light. Billboards advertising mobile phones and fertilizer in equal measure. Layla pressed her face to the window. It's so different. Everything was different. The quality of light. The smell of the air when they stopped for a rest break. The sound of language that Mira's ears couldn't parse into individual words. The weight of being completely untethered from anything familiar. They reached Marjolin as the sun was setting. The bus terminal was a dirt lot beside a bazaar that was closing for the evening. Vendors were packing away vegetables and fabric and household goods into wooden carts. The smell of cooking meat drifted from somewhere nearby. Mira showed the property documents to a taxi driver, an older man with a gold tooth and a Mercedes that had seen better decades. He studied the address, looked at Mira with an expression that cycled through confusion to concern to something that might have been recognition. He spoke in Uzbek, gestured, pointed toward the mountains. His tone suggested he was trying to communicate something important, possibly a warning. Mira pointed at the address again. "Can you take us there?" He shook his head, spoke more forcefully. The word yak appeared multiple times. "No." Layla tugged Mira's sleeve. "I don't think you want to go there." Another driver approached. Younger, maybe 30, with limited English cobbled together from movies and tourism. "Problem." Mira showed him the documents. His eyes widened. "Caravan." He said something else in Uzbek that included the words very old and dangerous. "We need to go there. It's ours." The young driver translated for the older one. A rapid exchange followed, the older man's tone increasingly adamant. Finally, the younger driver turned back to Mira. "He says no good. Building is fall down. No people there many years. He thinks you make mistake." "It's not a mistake. Can you drive us?" The young driver considered. 300,000 som. Mira had no reference for weather that was reasonable. She pulled out the som notes she'd exchanged at the airport. The driver counted them, nodded, gestured toward his vehicle. A Toyota that looked only slightly more reliable than the Mercedes. They drove out of Marjolin as full darkness settled. The paved road lasted 3 kilometers, then transitioned to packed dirt that turned to washboard rough enough to make Layla giggle nervously as they bounced. The headlights cut through dust that hung in the still air. Mountains loomed on both sides, dark shapes against slightly less dark sky. No streetlights. No houses after the first few kilometers. Just empty land that had probably looked exactly like this for centuries. The driver spoke suddenly, pointing. "Caravan." At first, Mira saw nothing. Then the headlights caught stone. A wall, massive and dark, rising from the desert floor like a geological formation. As they got closer, the scale became apparent. The wall was at least 40 feet high, running hundreds of feet in both directions. Built from stones the size of refrigerators, fitted together with the precision of people who understood that their work needed to survive centuries. The gateway appeared. Twin pillars supporting an arch decorated with carved geometric patterns that were still visible despite obvious erosion. The gate itself was gone, leaving a dark opening that led into some interior space the headlights couldn't quite reach. The driver stopped 30 feet from the entrance. He pointed, spoke rapidly. His tone made it clear this was as far as he was going. Mira and Layla got out. The driver popped the trunk, helped them remove their suitcases with movements that suggested he wanted this transaction completed quickly. He handed Mira a business card with a phone number, said something that included tomorrow and Marjolin, then got back in his car and left with a speed that kicked up significant dust. The silence after his taillights disappeared was absolute. No traffic, no voices, no ambient city hum. Just wind moving across open land and the particular quiet of places where human activity had stopped long enough for nature to reclaim auditory space. Layla's hand found Mira's. "It's really dark." Mira pulled out her phone, turned on the flashlight. The beam was pathetically small against the enormous darkness, but it was something. They approached the gateway slowly. Up close, the stone was even more impressive. Each block showed tool marks, evidence of the labor required to shape rock into building materials. The arch overhead was carved with Arabic script, worn but still legible to someone who could read it. The gateway was easily 20 feet high, wide enough for loaded camels to pass through side by side. Beyond the arch was a courtyard. Mira's flashlight beam couldn't capture the full scope, but she could make out shapes. Ruined walls forming rectangular spaces around the perimeter. A central area that might have been paved once, but was now mostly dirt and debris. In the far corner, a structure that had retained more of its integrity than the surrounding buildings. 2 stories with intact walls and what might have been a roof. They moved carefully, testing each step. The ground was uneven, scattered with stones that had fallen from the walls. Layla stayed close, her breath coming quick and shallow. "Mom, this is really scary." "I know." Mira kept her voice level. "But we're just looking. We'll figure out what to do tomorrow." The intact structure revealed itself gradually in the flashlight beam. Stone walls about 16 feet high. A doorway with a wooden lintel that had somehow survived despite its obvious age. Windows that were just openings, no glass, no shutters. Mira stepped through the doorway. The interior smelled of dust and time and something faintly spicy that she couldn't identify. Her light revealed a space maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. High ceiling with exposed beams. Walls that were bare stone. Floor that was packed earth with traces of what might have been tile or brick. In the corner sat a pile of fabric. Mira approached cautiously, ready for rats or worse. But it was just cloth. Old, stained with dirt and age, but recognizable as blankets or rugs. Nomadic textiles, maybe, left by someone who'd used this space for shelter at some point. Layla was examining the walls. "Look, there's writing." Mira joined her. Carved into the stone at eye height was text in multiple scripts. Arabic, Persian maybe, something that looked like Russian. And at the bottom, relatively fresh compared to the older carvings, English words scratched with something sharp. Parvin was here. 1987. Mira's throat tightened. Her grandmother. Standing in this exact spot 35 years ago. Leaving evidence of her presence like a message forward through time. Layla traced the letters with one finger. "Your grandma?" "Yeah." They spread the textiles across a section of floor that looked relatively clean. Created a makeshift bed from fabric that smelled like centuries. Mira used her phone's flashlight sparingly, aware that battery life was now a survival resource. Layla curled against her mother. "Are we going to live here?" The question deserved honesty. "I don't know. We'll see what it looks like in daylight." "It's really different from Phoenix." "It is. I'm scared." "Me too." Mira pulled her daughter closer. Through the empty windows, stars were visible. More stars than she'd ever seen in Phoenix. The Milky Way a bright slash across black sky. "But we're together. That's what matters." Layla's breathing deepened within minutes, exhaustion overriding fear. Mira stayed awake, listening to sounds she couldn't identify. Wind moving through ruined structures. Small animals in the courtyard. The particular creaks and settling noises of ancient stone responding to temperature changes. She thought about the $2,100 in credit card debt she'd incurred for plane tickets. The apartment in Phoenix that was being cleared by the sheriff right now. The nursing license that was worthless in Uzbekistan. Every choice that had led to this moment. Lying on a dirt floor in a condemned building 12,000 miles from anything familiar. Her phone showed 3:47 a.m. No signal, but the clock still worked. She'd set it to local time at the airport. Phoenix would be experiencing late afternoon. Normal people doing normal things in a world that felt increasingly theoretical. Sleep took her eventually. Not deep, not restful, but the kind of unconsciousness that came when the body overrode the mind's protests. She woke to sunlight streaming through the empty windows and Layla's voice calling from outside. "Mom, you have to see this." Mira stumbled to the doorway, blinking against brightness that seemed impossible after the previous night's darkness. The courtyard was revealed in full daylight, and it stole her breath. The caravanserai was enormous. The outer walls formed a perfect square, maybe 300 feet on each side. The courtyard they'd crossed in darkness was actually a central plaza surrounded by two-story structures on all four sides. Most had collapsed, but enough remained standing to show the original design. Arched doorways leading to small rooms. A second story accessible by stone staircases built into the corners. Decorative brickwork in geometric patterns. Evidence of a fountain or water system in the center, now dry and filled with debris. The mountains beyond were breathtaking. Snow-capped peaks catching morning light. Closer slopes covered in what might have been forest or scrubland. The Fergana Valley spread below, agricultural fields creating a patchwork of greens and browns. Layla stood in the middle of the courtyard, turning slowly. It's like a castle. Not a castle. A way station. A place where Silk Road caravans had stopped to rest, to trade, to shelter from weather and bandits. Mira had Googled caravanserais during one of the flight layovers. Learned they were built every 20 to 30 miles along major trade routes. Provided water, food, security. Some had been elaborate, with baths and mosques and separate quarters for merchants and animals. This one had been significant. The scale suggested wealth, importance. The decorative elements indicated patronage by someone with resources. The preservation, despite obvious abandonment, showed construction quality that had outlasted empires. A sound made Mira turn. A truck was approaching on the dirt road, trailing dust. Not the taxi from last night. Something larger. Flatbed with wooden sides. The truck stopped outside the gateway. 3 men got out. The oldest was maybe 60, wearing a traditional dappa hat and a jacket despite the morning warmth. The other 2 were younger, one filming with a phone camera. The older man called out in Uzbek. His tone was curious rather than threatening. Mira stepped forward, instinctively positioning herself between the men and Layla. The man switched to Russian-accented English. "You are American?" "Yes. This is my property. I inherited it." His eyebrows rose. "You are Parvin's granddaughter?" The shock of hearing her grandmother's name from a stranger's mouth made Myra's response come out sharper than intended. "You knew her?" Everyone knew Parvin. He gestured at the caravanserai. "She came here many times. Try to stop government from destroying. She said it has history value." He shook his head. "Nobody listened. Building is too dangerous. Municipality wants to demolish. They can't. It's mine now." The man's expression shifted to something like pity. "You buy this place?" "I inherited it." "How much you pay?" The question confused her. "I didn't pay anything. It was left to me." One of the younger men spoke rapidly in Uzbek. The older man responded, then turned back to Mira. "My nephew says you're crazy. This building is worth nothing. Only demolition cost." The second young man was still filming. Mira noticed now he was smiling. Not friendly, more like someone witnessing entertainment. "Why is he recording?" "For social media. People will laugh. American woman comes to Uzbekistan, takes ruined building nobody wants." The older man's tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "This is funny story." Heat crept up Myra's neck. "It's not funny. It's my property. Property that falls down. Look." He pointed at the nearest wall. "Cracks. Unsafe. Next earthquake, this all comes down." Mira looked where he pointed. Visible cracks ran through several sections of wall. Not small. Structural. The kind of damage that suggested the building was actively failing. The older man continued. "Municipality engineer says demolition cost maybe $100,000. More than building worth. They want owner to pay, but no owner for many years. Now you are owner." He shrugged. "Good luck." The 3 men walked around the courtyard, the nephew filming continuously. They examined walls, pointed out damage, discussed in Uzbek that was punctuated by laughter. The older man took photographs of obvious structural failures. After 15 minutes, they returned to Mira. The older man handed her a business card. "I am Rustam Yuzhov, Marjolin Historical Society. We tried to save this place 10 years ago. Couldn't get funding." He gestured at the caravanserai. "Too expensive to restore. Too dangerous to leave standing. Best choice is demolish before someone gets hurt." "I'm not demolishing it." "Then you pay for safety fence." Engineer report. Insurance. Many cost. He tilted his head. You have money for this? The silence answered for her. Rustam nodded. I thought not. You sleep here last night? Yes. Very dangerous. Old buildings can collapse any time. You have daughter to protect. He looked at Layla with genuine concern. Please, go to Marjolaine. Find hotel. This place is not safe. After they left, Mira walked the courtyard perimeter, examining the structure with new eyes. The cracks Rustam had pointed out were everywhere. Walls leaning at angles that couldn't be stable. Sections where stones had shifted, creating gaps. Evidence of water damage. Places where vegetation had taken root in mortar, slowly prying the masonry apart. Layla appeared beside her. Is it really going to fall down? I don't know. But looking at the damage, the abandonment, the scale of decay, Mira felt the weight of her mistakes settling across her shoulders. She'd fled Phoenix with no plan beyond getting away. Had gambled everything on a fantasy that inheriting property meant inheriting salvation. Instead, she'd inherited a liability. A condemned building in a country where she had no resources, no connections, no language skills. Well, the locals already thought she was a joke. Her phone buzzed. Email notification. The credit card company welcoming her to increased debt and reminding her that minimum payment was due in 3 weeks. The amount made her physically sick. She destroyed her credit for tickets to a ruin that was worthless. She sat heavily on a fallen stone. Layla settled beside her, small hand finding hers. They sat in silence, watching dust motes drift through shafts of sunlight, while reality reasserted itself with cruel clarity. The video appeared online that afternoon. Mira discovered it when her phone finally found a weak signal near the gateway. Someone had created a TikTok account called Crazy American Woman and posted the nephew's footage. The video showed Mira standing in the courtyard looking confused and defensive. Text overlay in Uzbek and English. American inherits $1 ruin. Thinks she won lottery. The nephew's commentary was in Uzbek, but the tone was clear. Mockery. Disbelief. Entertainment at someone else's stupid mistake. It had 40,000 views in 6 hours. The comments were brutal. English ones calling her delusional. Uzbek ones she couldn't read, but could interpret from the laughing emojis. Shares climbing steadily. By evening, local news had picked it up. A reporter called Mira's phone number. She had no idea how they'd gotten it, but wasn't thinking clearly enough to refuse the interview. The reporter's English was excellent. Miss Kahn, can you explain why you came to Uzbekistan to claim a worthless property? It's not worthless. It's historical. The municipality has condemned it. Do you have funds to restore it? I'm assessing my options. Where are you staying? The question landed like an accusation. On the property. In a building with no roof? With your daughter? The reporter's tone shifted from curious to concerned. Is that safe? Mira ended the call, but the damage was done. The story spread. American woman homeless in Uzbekistan after inheriting ruin. Single mother's terrible inheritance mistake. What was she thinking? Rustam called that evening. You should leave. This story makes you look foolish. People are laughing. Not good for you or your daughter. I have nowhere to go. Silence on the line. Then, gentler. Marjolaine has hostel. Very cheap. You can stay there while you figure out what to do. I can't afford it. How much money do you have? The question should have been invasive. Instead, it felt like the first honest conversation she'd had since arriving. $200. And max credit cards. Rustam's sigh carried across the connection. Wait there. I bring you food. He arrived an hour later with bread, cheese, vegetables, bottled water. Enough for several days. He set it down in the structure where Mira and Layla had slept. My wife says I should help you. She remembers Parvin. Says your grandmother was a difficult woman, but not crazy. He looked around the space. She believed this building mattered. Maybe she was right. Maybe not. But you are here now, so we help. Tears threatened. Mira pushed them back. Why? Because laughing is easy. Helping is harder. My wife chooses harder. He pointed at the carved text on the wall. Parvin was here. Your grandmother spent 20 years fighting to protect this place. She died before winning. Maybe you continue the fight. Maybe you fail, but at least you try. That is worth something. After he left, Mira and Layla ate in silence. The food was simple, but felt like grace. Bread that was fresh, cheese that was rich, water that was cold and clean. Layla spoke through a mouthful of bread. Everyone thinks we're dumb. A lot of people think we made a mistake. Did we? Mira looked around the room, at the ancient stones, the carved text, the structure that had survived centuries but might not survive much longer. At her daughter, eating bread in the last light of day. I don't know yet. That night, lying on the textiles that smelled like time, Mira made lists in her head. What she knew. The building was condemned. Restoration would cost hundreds of thousands. The locals thought she was foolish. The internet agreed. She had $200 and nowhere else to go. What she didn't know, why Parvin had fought so hard to protect this place, what value it might hold beyond the obvious, whether there was any way to salvage this disaster. Sleep came slowly. Through the empty windows, stars rotated overhead. The same stars that had watched caravans arrive here for centuries, that had witnessed the building's glory and its decline, that cared nothing for human hopes or mistakes. Somewhere in the ruin, stone shifted. A small sound, barely audible. The building settling, or failing, or just continuing its slow transformation from structure to geology. Mira pulled Layla closer. They were warm. They were together. They were sleeping in a condemned building in Uzbekistan while the internet laughed at their mistake. But they were here, and for better or worse, this was where they'd start figuring out what came next. Morning arrived with a sound Mira had never heard before. The Muslim call to prayer, amplified from a distant mosque in Marjolin, carrying across the valley in waves that felt both ancient and immediate. Layla woke beside her, blinking in the early light. What is that? Prayer call. 5 times a day in Muslim countries. They ate the remaining bread and cheese from Rustam's delivery. Mira rationed carefully, aware that $200 wouldn't stretch far even in a country where costs were lower than Phoenix. Her phone showed multiple missed calls from American numbers she didn't recognize. Reporters probably, or debt collectors who'd somehow tracked her internationally. She ignored them and focused on the immediate problem, understanding what she actually owned. The property documents Farah had sent were minimal. Legal description, coordinates, transfer of title. Nothing about the structure's history, its significance, or why Parvin had fought so hard to preserve it. Mira walked the courtyard again, this time with purpose rather than panic. She counted the rooms that lined the perimeter. 42 total, each approximately 12 by 15 feet. Most had collapsed roofs, but the walls showed consistent construction. The same precisely fitted stonework. The same arched doorways. In the northeastern corner, she found stairs. Stone steps built into the wall, leading to a second-story gallery that ran along the interior perimeter. Most of the gallery had collapsed, but a section remained intact. Mira climbed carefully, testing each step. From above, the caravanserai's layout became clear. The courtyard was designed for animals, the ground floor rooms for storage and servants, the second story for merchants and travelers of higher status. The structure in the corner where they'd slept was probably the most important building, reserved for caravan leaders or wealthy traders. She noticed something else from this vantage point. The central courtyard wasn't just empty space. Rectangular depressions in the ground suggested buried structures. Cisterns maybe, or storage cellars. Places where the stone floor had collapsed inward, revealing depths below. Layla called from below. "Mom, someone's coming." A different vehicle this time. A white SUV that looked official. It stopped outside the gateway, and a woman emerged. Mid-40s, wearing a blazer despite the heat, carrying a briefcase. She walked with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. She spoke in British accented English. "Mira Kahn." "Yes, I'm Dr. Layla Osmanova, Tashkent State University, Department of Historical Preservation." She pulled out credentials, showed them to Mira. "I saw the news coverage. I'd like to examine your property." "What?" Dr. Osmanova's expression suggested the question was unnecessary. "Because this is a 14th century caravanserai, one of only 12 substantially intact structures from the Timurid period remaining in Uzbekistan. Your grandmother spent 2 decades trying to get protected status. The words landed without immediate comprehension. Mira repeated them slowly. 14th century, approximately 1370 to 1390, based on the architectural style. Built during Timur's consolidation of the Silk Road trade networks. Dr. Osmanova was already walking toward the gateway, not waiting for permission. The decorative brickwork suggests significant patronage. This wasn't a minorway station. She entered the courtyard and stopped, her professional composure cracking slightly. My God, the preservation is remarkable. Mira followed. The municipality says it's condemned, that it needs to be demolished. The municipality is staffed by engineers who assess structural integrity, not historical value. Dr. Osmanova pulled a camera from her briefcase, began photographing methodically. They see liability. I see irreplaceable cultural heritage. She moved through the space with practiced efficiency, documenting details Mira hadn't noticed. Carved stones that showed evidence of inscription. Decorative elements that indicated the building's original grandeur. Areas where plaster had fallen away to reveal older construction beneath. In the corner structure where Mira and Layla had slept, Dr. Osmanova stopped at the wall with Parvin's carved name. She traced the English letters, then examined the older text above it. This Arabic inscription is a foundation marker. It names the patron who funded construction. She pulled out her phone, photographed it, used a translation app. Her eyes widened. This caravanserai was commissioned by Cadet Ibn Mahmud, a merchant who controlled the silk trade between Samarkand and Kashgar. The name meant nothing to Mira. Dr. Osmanova continued, excitement bleeding into her professional tone. Cadet was one of the wealthiest men in Central Asia. His trade network extended from Venice to Beijing. His caravanserais were legendary for their luxury and security. She turned to Mira. If this is one of his buildings, it's not just historically significant. It's potentially extraordinary. But it's condemned, because it needs restoration, not demolition. Dr. Osmanova photographed the structural cracks. Yes, there's damage. Earthquakes, weather, neglect. But the core construction is sound. Timurid builders use techniques that modern engineers still don't fully understand. They built for centuries, not decades. She walked to the courtyard center, examined the collapsed floor sections. These depressions worry me. They suggest subsidence or underground voids. Was there a cistern system? I don't know. Dr. Osmanova pulled a small metal detector from her briefcase. The device looked expensive, professional grade. She swept it across one of the depressions. It began beeping immediately. Metal signatures. Could be structural reinforcement, or... She looked up at Mira. May I excavate a test section, just to assess what's below? Mira had no framework for making this decision. Will it damage anything? I'll be careful, and if there's historical material below, it needs to be documented before the municipality demolishes everything. They spent the next hour clearing debris from one of the collapsed floor sections. Dr. Osmanova worked with the precision of someone who'd done this countless times. She photographed each layer as it was exposed, took notes in a field journal, treated the dirt like it contained answers. 2 feet down, her trowel hit something solid. Not stone, something with a different resonance. She cleared the area carefully, exposing a wooden surface. Planks, each about 8 inches wide, fitted tightly together. This is a floor, or a covering. She worked along the edges, finding where the planks ended. A rectangular area, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet. There's a chamber beneath. Layla had been watching from a safe distance. Now she moved closer, like a basement, more like a storage vault. Caravanserais often had secure areas where merchants could store valuable goods. Dr. Osmanova looked at Mira. I need to open this. But once I do, whatever's inside becomes subject to Uzbek cultural property law. Are you prepared for that? What does that mean? It means if there's anything of historical or cultural significance, the government can claim it. You won't necessarily retain ownership. Mira looked at the exposed wooden planks, at Dr. Osmanova's camera and field journal, at Layla standing in the courtyard of a building they technically owned but couldn't afford to maintain. Open it. Dr. Osmanova used a small crowbar to carefully pry up the planks. The wood was old, but had been protected by the earth above it. Each plank came away with a groan of aged timber resisting movement. The vault below revealed itself in stages. First, darkness that the sun couldn't immediately penetrate. Then, as their eyes adjusted, shapes, rectangular forms, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stacked in organized rows. Dr. Osmanova lowered a flashlight into the opening. The beam caught surfaces that reflected light. Not metal, something organic. She inhaled sharply. Ceramic containers. Sealed. Her hand shook slightly as she adjusted the light. This is a merchant's cache. They store valuable goods here, probably intending to retrieve them later. She pulled a small ladder from her SUV, descended into the vault carefully. Mira heard her moving below, the sound of ceramic scraping against ceramic. When she emerged, she was carrying a jar. It was about 12 inches tall, 8 inches in diameter, with a sealed lid bound with what looked like wax. The ceramic was cream-colored with blue decoration. Arabic script circled the middle. Dr. Osmanova set it down with extraordinary care. Her voice was tight. This is Yuan Dynasty porcelain. Chinese export ware from the 13th or 14th century. She photographed it from multiple angles. Do you understand what that means? It's old. It means this jar traveled the entire length of the Silk Road, was valuable enough to store in a secure vault, was never retrieved, which suggests something prevented the owner from returning. She examined the seal. I shouldn't open this without proper laboratory conditions. But she looked at Mira. This is your property. Technically, you have a right. Mira's hands were shaking. What do you think is inside? Based on the jar size and shape, likely spices or medicinal substances. Those were among the most valuable commodities on the Silk Road. Weight for weight, some spices were worth more than gold. She pulled a small knife from her field kit. I'm going to break the seal. Once I do, whatever's inside will begin degrading. We'll need to document everything immediately. The wax cracked cleanly. Dr. Osmanova lifted the lid with movements that suggested she was handling religious artifacts. The smell hit immediately. Cinnamon. So strong and pure it made Mira's eyes water. Not the grocery store version, but something richer, more complex. 7 centuries of aging concentrated into an olfactory experience that felt like breathing history. Dr. Osmanova peered inside, used a small tool to extract a sample. Bar curls, perfectly preserved. She photographed them, placed a small amount in a sample bag. Ceylon cinnamon, Cinnamomum verum, the highest grade. Her voice carried awe. In the 14th century, this would have been worth a fortune. 1 jar could buy a house. Layla had moved closer, drawn by the smell. It's just cinnamon, not just cinnamon. This variety, at this age, properly preserved? Dr. Osmanova did calculations on her phone. Modern collectors pay extraordinary prices for verified historical spices. But more importantly, this proves the vault contains Silk Road trade goods. She looked at the opening in the ground. We need to inventory everything down there. Now, before word spreads and we lose control of the site. They worked through the afternoon. Dr. Osmanova descended repeatedly, bringing up jar after jar, each one sealed, labeled in Arabic or Chinese script, containing substances that had waited 7 centuries to be discovered. Saffron in a jade green jar. The thread still vivid red-orange, releasing a scent that made the courtyard smell like luxury. Black pepper in a blue ceramic container, the corns whole and perfect. Cardamom pods in a jar decorated with geometric patterns. Cloves that looked like they'd been harvested yesterday. By evening, they'd removed 43 containers. Dr. Osmanova photographed and cataloged each one with obsessive precision. She took samples, measured volumes, documented the Arabic inscriptions that identified contents, and, in some cases, origin points. This one is from Kerala. She held a jar of what appeared to be dried ginger. This one from Sumatra. This one from Sri Lanka. She looked at Mira. You're holding a collection that represents the entire spice trade network of the medieval Islamic world. What's it worth? Dr. Osmanova hesitated. I'm a historian, not an appraiser. But, conservatively, each jar could be worth anywhere from $50,000 to several $100,000 to the right collector or museum. The numbers didn't process. Mira tried to do math and failed. How many jars are down there? I've removed 43. I can see at least 100 more. Possibly 200. Dr. Osmanova's professional composure was completely gone now, replaced by the excitement of someone who'd stumbled into a discovery that would define their career. This is the largest cache of preserved Silk Road trade goods ever found in Central Asia. She pulled out her phone, made a call in rapid Uzbek. Listened, responded, her tone becoming increasingly urgent. She hung up and turned to Mira. I've contacted the Ministry of Culture. They're sending a team from Tashkent tonight. This site needs to be secured immediately. What does that mean for me? I don't know yet. Uzbek law is complex regarding archaeological discoveries on private property. Dr. Osmanova's expression softened. But Mira, you need to understand. This changes everything. The building can't be demolished now. It's not just historically significant. It's a treasure house. The word treasure felt surreal. Mira looked at her daughter, who was sitting beside a jar of saffron worth more than their Phoenix apartment had cost, eating bread in the last light of day. The government team arrived at 9 p.m. 3 vehicles, including one marked with official seals. 6 people emerged, led by a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit that looked incongruous in the desert setting. He introduced himself in perfect English. I am Bobur Ramov, Deputy Minister of Culture. Dr. Osmanova's call was extraordinary. He looked at the jars lined up in the courtyard. May I? He examined the containers with the careful touch of someone who understood their value. Photographed the Arabic inscriptions. Opened one jar of saffron and inhaled deeply. His eyes closed. My God, this is museum quality. He looked at Mira. You are the property owner? Yes. And you discovered this today? Dr. Osmanova discovered it. I just gave permission to excavate. Ramov smiled thinly. An important distinction. Under Uzbek law, archaeological discoveries become state property. However, finders receive compensation and property owners retain certain rights. He gestured at the vault opening. How many containers remain below? At least 100, Dr. Osmanova said. Possibly double that. We stopped removing them when I realized the scale. Ramov made calls. His team began setting up lights, powering them from a portable generator. Within an hour, the courtyard was illuminated like a construction site. More people arrived. Archaeologists from the Tashkent Institute, a specialist in Islamic ceramics, a photographer with professional equipment. They worked through the night. Mira and Layla watched from the corner structure, exhausted but unable to sleep. The vault disgorged its contents in steady progression. Jars of nutmeg, containers of mace, boxes of what appeared to be dried herbs with medicinal properties. At 3 a.m., they found something different. A larger container, sealed with multiple layers of wax. The Arabic inscription was longer, more elaborate. Dr. Osmanova translated with help from the Islamic specialist. Property of Qadadat Ibn Mahmud. For transport to Samarkand under guard. Contains. She paused, rechecked the translation. Contains tribute for Timur the Lame. The name meant something to everyone present. Timur, also called Tamerlane, the conqueror who'd built an empire from India to Turkey, who'd made Samarkand the most beautiful city in the world, who died in 1405 while planning to invade China. Ramov's voice was tight. Open it. The seal broke with the same clean crack as the others. Inside, wrapped in silk that disintegrated at touch, were more jars. But these were different. Smaller, more ornate. Chinese porcelain of extraordinary quality. The first jar contained what looked like dried flowers. The specialist examined them carefully. Saffron, but not ordinary saffron. This is Kashmiri saffron, the most valuable variety. He did quick calculations. Based on volume and assuming period-appropriate quality, this jar alone could be worth $300,000 to collectors. They opened 5 more jars from the tribute box. All contained spices of the highest grade. The final jar held something else. A document, sealed in wax, written on paper that had somehow survived 7 centuries. Dr. Osmanova translated the Persian text with shaking hands. It's a bill of lading, listing contents and their value in period currency. She did calculations, cross-referenced with her phone. The total value of goods in this vault, converted to modern equivalent, approximately $795 million. The number hung in the pre-dawn air. No one spoke. The generator hummed. Insects attracted by the lights created shadows on the ancient stones. Rahimov broke the silence. This is the most significant archaeological discovery in Uzbekistan's history as an independent nation. He looked at Mira. His expression was complex. Congratulations, Miss Kahn. And I'm very sorry. Sorry, because your life is about to become extraordinarily complicated. By dawn, the news had spread. How? Mira couldn't determine. But satellite trucks began arriving. Reporters from Uzbek state television, international journalists who'd somehow learned about the discovery overnight. By 8 a.m., the dirt road was lined with vehicles. Mira watched from inside the corner structure while Rahimov gave a press conference in the courtyard. He was skilled at managing the narrative, emphasized the historical significance, downplayed the monetary value, made no commitments about ownership or compensation. The same nephew who'd filmed her arrival appeared with his phone camera. His expression had changed from mockery to shock. He approached Mira carefully. I am sorry. For the video. For laughing. His English was broken, but sincere. You are not crazy American woman. You are very lucky American woman. The video he posted this time was different. I was wrong. She inherited $795 million in spices. It went viral faster than the first one. Within 4 hours, it had 3 million views. International media picked it up. Single mother's condemned building contains Silk Road fortune. Phoenix woman discovers medieval treasure in Uzbekistan. Myra's phone died from a volume of calls. Reporters, lawyers, documentary producers, museums, collectors, universities. Everyone wanted access, interviews, rights to the story. Rustam appeared mid-morning, accompanied by his wife. The woman was Myra's age, wearing traditional dress, carrying food that smelled like hope. My wife says you need help. Rustam looked at the chaos of journalists and officials. This is too much for one person. His wife spoke in Uzbek. Rustam translated. She says Parvin would be proud that you finished what your grandmother started. The words broke something in Mira. Tears came finally, the release of tension she'd been holding since Phoenix. Layla pressed against her side, and Rustam's wife wrapped them both in an embrace that smelled of bread and kindness. Dr. Osmanova appeared through the crowd. Mira, we need to talk. Privately. They retreated to the corner structure. Dr. Osmanova pulled out documents. The ministry is claiming the spices as cultural property. You'll receive finder's compensation, but not ownership. How much? Compensation? Uzbek law stipulates 10% of assessed value for archaeological discoveries on private land. She did calculations. If the collection is valued at $795 million, you'd receive approximately $79 million. The number was meaningless, too large to process. Mira heard it the same way she'd heard flight information in languages she didn't speak. Sounds without comprehension. Dr. Osmanova continued. However, there's a complication. The ministry wants to claim the building too. Declare it a national monument. That would terminate your ownership. Can they do that? Legally, yes, if they can prove overwhelming public interest. Dr. Osmanova's expression suggested she was choosing words carefully. But there's another option. What? Donate the building to the state. In exchange, they establish a foundation in your grandmother's name. You serve on the board, receive a salary, maintain decision-making power over restoration and use. She pulled out more documents. The building becomes a museum. The spices are displayed here, in the place they were stored. The foundation funds restoration. You and Layla have permanent residence rights in the caretaker's quarters. Why would they offer that? Because the alternative is years of legal battles that make everyone look bad. This way, the government gets a cultural triumph. You get financial security and honor your grandmother's legacy. Everyone wins. Mira looked at Layla, who was listening with the intensity of someone whose future was being decided. What do you think? Layla's voice was small but certain. Grandma Parvin fought to protect this place. Maybe we should too. That afternoon, Rahimov presented the formal offer. A 50-page document in English and Uzbek outlining terms. The foundation would receive an initial endowment of $80 million, funded through the eventual sale or lease of the spice collection to museums. Mira would receive a salary of $150,000 annually as the foundation director. Layla would have guaranteed admission to any Uzbek university with full scholarship. They would live on the property in renovated quarters. The building would be restored to its 14th century glory and opened as a museum. You can negotiate, Rahimov said, but I believe this is fair. Your grandmother spent 20 years fighting for this building. This ensures it's protected forever. Mira read through the document twice, found a clause that made her pause. It says I have to live in Uzbekistan permanently. The foundation requires a director present on site. That's you. She thought about Phoenix, the eviction notice, the apartment she'd lost, the nursing job that barely covered rent, the life she'd fled because it was killing her slowly. What if I want to visit the U.S.? You're free to travel, but your primary residence must be here. Mira looked around the courtyard, at the ancient stones, at the journalists filming, at Layla standing beside a jar of saffron worth more than most people earned in a lifetime, at the mountains beyond catching afternoon light. I need to think about it. You have 48 hours. After that, we proceed with standard cultural property claims. That night, after the journalists left and the officials returned to Tashkent, Mira and Layla sat in the courtyard under stars that had witnessed 7 centuries of this building's existence. Layla spoke first. Do you want to go back to Phoenix? I don't know. What about you? I like it here. It's scary, but different scary than Phoenix. She picked up a small stone, examined it. In Phoenix, I was scared about money and where we'd sleep. Here, I'm scared because everything's new. But we have food. We have a place. People are helping. Mira pulled her daughter close. You're 9. You shouldn't have to think about money and homelessness. But I did. And now, maybe I don't have to anymore. The simplicity of childhood logic. Mira felt the weight of adult complications dissolving slightly. The fear of the unfamiliar balanced against the certainty of the familiar being unsustainable. What would you do here? Go to school. Learn Uzbek. Help with the museum. Layla's voice carried excitement Mira hadn't heard in years. Mom, we'd be protecting history. That's important, right? It is. They slept in the corner structure that night, but it felt different than the first night. Not refuge from desperation, but choice from possibility. Morning brought Dr. Osmanova with a different kind of news. The British Museum called. They want to negotiate a long-term loan of the spice collection. $50 million for a 10-year display contract. Why would they pay that much? Because this is the largest intact collection of medieval spices in existence. Because it includes documented Silk Road trade goods. Because the story is extraordinary. She paused. And because they're competing with the Smithsonian, the Louvre, and the Shanghai Museum. The bidding will likely go higher. Myra's head spun. I thought the government claimed the spices. They have, but the government is pragmatic. They can't afford to build a proper museum immediately. Leasing the collection to major institutions generates revenue while they develop infrastructure here. She pulled out her phone, showed Mira architectural renderings. This is what they're proposing for the caravanserai. Full restoration, climate-controlled display spaces, educational center, tourist facilities. Estimated cost, $40 million. The renderings showed the building transformed. Roofs restored, walls repaired, the courtyard paved with replica 14th century tiles, gardens filled with plants that would have been common in the Timurid period. They're calling it the Providence Street Memorial Caravanserai. Your grandmother's name. Forever. That evening, Mira called Rahimov. I'll sign the agreement. On one condition. What condition? 10% of the foundation's revenue goes to supporting homeless families in Uzbekistan. Housing assistance, job training, Childcare support. Silence on the line. Then why? Because 6 weeks ago, I was homeless in Phoenix. I know what that feels like. If this money exists because of my luck, some of it should help people who aren't lucky. Ramov's response was careful. That's unusual, but acceptable. I'll add it to the agreement. Mira signed the documents the next day. 70 pages of legal language that transformed her from a woman fleeing eviction to the director of an $80 million foundation. Her hand shook when she wrote her name, but the signature was legally binding. The press conference was held in the courtyard with international media present. Rahimov announced the discovery's details, the foundation's creation, the building's preservation. He presented Mira as the inheritor of her grandmother's vision. Parvin Khan fought alone for 20 years to protect this site. Today, her granddaughter ensures it will be preserved for centuries. The questions came rapidly. What made her accept the building? Did she know about the treasure? What would she do with the money? Mira answered honestly. I was desperate. I had nowhere else to go. I thought I'd inherited a problem. Instead, I inherited my grandmother's unfinished work. A reporter from the BBC asked, "Do you regret coming to Uzbekistan?" Mira looked at Layla, standing beside her in the courtyard, at the mountains beyond, at the ancient stones that had kept their secrets until the moment someone was desperate enough to claim them. I regret that it took desperation to bring me here, but I don't regret being here now. The video of the nephew mocking her resurfaced with new context. Someone created a split-screen comparison. Before, crazy American woman. After, director of $80 million foundation. It went viral again, this time as a redemption story. The nephew himself appeared at the gate 3 days later, looking sheepish. I want to apologize. Properly, not just online. Mira invited him in. He stood in the courtyard, surrounded by evidence of his mistake. I am Davrin. I was wrong about you. About the building. About everything. You weren't wrong about the building being dangerous. It was condemned. But you saw something we didn't. Or maybe you just had faith. I had desperation. Faith came later. Davrin pulled out his phone. I want to delete the first video. The one where I laugh. Leave it up. He looked shocked. Why? Because it's true. I was a crazy American woman taking a condemned building. The only thing that changed was what we found underneath. Mira gestured at the courtyard. People should see the whole story. The mockery and the discovery. It's more honest. Restoration began within a month. A construction crew from Samarkand arrived with equipment and expertise in historical preservation. They worked with the care of surgeons, documenting every stone they moved, photographing every detail they exposed. The structural engineer was a woman named Zarina who'd studied at Moscow State University. She examined the cracks that Rustam had pointed out on that first day. These are scary, but not critical. The building has survived 7 centuries. It can survive restoration. She pointed at the foundation. Tamura construction is extraordinary. They use techniques we're only now beginning to understand. The foundation stones, when exposed, revealed their secret. Each massive block was fitted with dowels and clever weight distribution that allowed the structure to flex during earthquakes rather than crack. The walls weren't just stacked stone, but integrated systems designed to move as units. This building was engineered to last forever, Zarina said. Your grandmother knew that. That's why she fought so hard. The vault yielded more surprises during official excavation. Behind the spice jars, they found silk, bolts of fabric wrapped in wax paper, the colors still vivid. Chinese, Persian, and Byzantine textiles worth millions more. Deeper still, they discovered documents, bills of lading, letters of credit, a merchant's account book that detailed trade routes and prices across the entire Silk Road network. Historians wept over the find. It was primary source material that rewrote understanding of medieval commerce. The total value of the collection grew with each discovery. The revised estimate reached $1.2 billion. The foundation's share increased proportionally. Mira watched the excavation with Layla, both of them understanding they were witnessing history being revealed. Dr. Osmanova treated them like colleagues now, explaining each find, involving them in decisions about preservation and display. "Your grandmother would have loved this," she said one afternoon. "She died before seeing any of it. But she knew. Somehow, she knew it was worth fighting for." Mira thought about Parvin, the woman who'd visited once when Mira was 7, who'd smelled like cardamom and told stories about places Mira couldn't imagine, who'd died alone in Uzbekistan, still fighting for a building nobody valued. "I wish I'd known her better. You know her now, through this." Dr. Osmanova gestured at the caravanserai. "This is her testimony, her proof that she was right." The museum opened 18 months after Mira signed the agreement. The restoration was complete. The building looked as it might have in 1380, with accurate tile work, painted ceilings, and gardens filled with period-appropriate plants. The spice collection was displayed in climate-controlled cases in the original vault, now accessible via a glass floor that let visitors see the storage system. Each jar had a label explaining its contents, origin, and historical value. The British Museum had won the loan contract for the first decade, $50 million that funded educational programs and ongoing preservation. But half the collection remained in Uzbekistan, rotating through displays that told the story of the Silk Road. The opening ceremony drew officials from across Central Asia. The president of Uzbekistan attended, giving a speech about cultural heritage and national pride. Rahimov presented Mira with an award for historical preservation. But the moment that mattered most came when they unveiled the memorial plaque beside the entrance. Bronze, mounted on stone that had stood for 7 centuries. The Providence Street Memorial Caravanserai, preserved through the vision of one woman who fought alone and the courage of another who finished her work. Below it, smaller text. Some inheritances are measured in stone and time, not currency. Mira stood before it with Layla, both of them understanding what it meant. Parvin's name would outlast them all, would be spoken by visitors for decades, maybe centuries, would transform from mockery to monument. The internet videos that had once ridiculed Mira became teaching tools. The university used them in classes about the gap between perceived value and actual worth, about trusting vision over conventional wisdom, about how desperation could lead to discovery. The nephew, Davrin, became the museum's social media manager. His first video in the new role was a retrospective. "I laughed at the American woman who inherited a ruin. I was wrong. Here's what she actually inherited." The video showed the restored caravanserai, the spice collection, the documents and textiles, Mira and Layla leading tours. The foundation's work supporting homeless families across Uzbekistan. It ended with Davrin speaking to the camera. She inherited her grandmother's fight, and she won. The foundation's first year brought challenges Mira had never anticipated. Managing an $80 million endowment required skills she didn't possess. Financial oversight, international negotiations, cultural diplomacy, all of it landed on her desk with a weight of responsibility that couldn't be delegated. Rahimov had anticipated this. He assigned her a deputy director, a man named Alisher Nazarov who'd worked for the Ministry of Culture for 20 years. Alisher was 53, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had the patient demeanor of someone who'd survived Soviet bureaucracy and wasn't intimidated by anything less threatening than a tank. "You are the vision," he told Mira during their first meeting. "I'm the execution. Together, we make this work." He taught her how to read financial reports, how to negotiate with museum directors who wanted the spice collection for pennies on the dollar, how to navigate Uzbek regulations that seemed designed to create complications rather than solutions. Most importantly, he taught her that being right didn't mean being comfortable. "Your grandmother spent 20 years being uncomfortable," Alisher said. "She was right, but lonely. You are also right, but you have help. That is progress." The foundation's mandate extended beyond the caravanserai. 10% of revenue for homeless support meant creating programs from scratch. Mira partnered with Uzbek Social Services, establishing emergency housing in Tashkent, Samarkand, and Marjalan. Job training centers, childcare subsidies for single parents. The programs carried Parvin's name. The Parvin Khan Housing Initiative, the Providence Kahn Family Support Center, each one a monument to a woman who died poor and alone, now remembered as someone who'd changed thousands of lives. Mira visited the Tashkent Center 6 months after it opened. A converted Soviet-era dormitory transformed into transitional housing for 40 families. Clean rooms, shared kitchens, childcare on site, job counselors who helped residents find employment. She met Gulnara, a woman her age with 3 children who'd been homeless after her husband disappeared into Russia for work and never returned. Gulnara's face carried the same exhaustion Mira recognized from her own reflection a year earlier. "You understand," Gulnara said in broken English. "You were like us. I was exactly like you. 6 months ago, I was sleeping in alleys with my daughter." Gulnara's eyes filled. "And now you run this place." "Now I run this place because I remember what it feels like to have nowhere to go." The conversation stayed with Mira for weeks. The recognition that her desperation had purchased understanding that couldn't be gained any other way. That the inheritance wasn't just the building or the treasure, but the experience of being powerless in a world that didn't care. Layla thrived in ways that surprised both of them. She'd enrolled in the Marjolin International School, where instruction was in English, Russian, and Uzbek. Within 6 months, she was conversational in Uzbek and learning Russian. Her rock collection expanded to include Central Asian minerals, jade from the Fergana Valley, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, turquoise from Iran. She made friends with children from Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Korea, Turkey, kids whose parents worked in diplomacy or international development, kids who thought having a mother who ran a museum was normal rather than strange. But she also befriended local children from Marjolin, kids who lived in the Mahalas near the Caravanserai, who came to the museum after school to do homework in the library, who taught Layla Uzbek playground games and invited her to family celebrations. One evening, Layla came home speaking rapid Uzbek to a friend named Shalo. They were planning a project for school about Silk Road trade routes. Mira listened to her daughter code-switching between languages with the effortless fluency of children who learn by immersion rather than study. "You sound like you've always lived here," Mira said after Shalo left. Layla shrugged. "Maybe I was supposed to. Like, we were meant to come here." The idea should have seemed like magical thinking. Instead, it felt uncomfortably accurate. The chain of events that led them here, eviction, inheritance, desperation, had the quality of inevitability when viewed backward, as if Parvin had reached across death to bring them to exactly where they needed to be. The first winter in Uzbekistan was brutal. Temperatures dropped below freezing. The mountains disappeared behind snow that fell for days. The Caravanserai, now properly heated and insulated, became a refuge that justified every dollar spent on restoration. Mira thought about the first night they'd slept there. September warmth, broken windows, no electricity. The terror of not knowing if they'd survive the next day. Now, they lived in renovated quarters attached to the main building. 2 bedrooms, modern kitchen, bathroom with hot water that didn't require hauling buckets. But she kept the corner structure where they'd first slept exactly as it had been. Parvin's carved message on the wall. The ancient textiles they'd used as bedding, now preserved in a display case. A memorial to desperation that had transformed into hope. International attention brought complications. Documentary crews wanted exclusive access. Publishers offered book deals. A Hollywood producer called about film rights, suggesting Jennifer Lopez for Myra's role in a way that made Mira laugh until she couldn't breathe. She refused most requests. The story wasn't hers to sell. It belonged to Parvin, to the merchants who'd hidden the spices, to the building that had kept secrets for 7 centuries. Turning it into entertainment felt like betrayal. But she agreed to one documentary, produced by BBC and Uzbekistan State Television jointly. The condition was that Parvin's story received equal time to Myra's, that the film explained why preservation mattered beyond treasure value. The filming took 4 months. Camera crews documented restoration work, interviewed historians about Silk Road significance, followed Mira and Layla through daily routines that had become ordinary despite their extraordinary context. The director was a British woman named Mira Kahn who'd made documentaries about archaeological discoveries in Egypt and Peru. She understood that the real story wasn't the treasure, but the transformation it enabled. People love treasure stories, Sarah said during an interview session. But what makes this special is your grandmother's 20-year fight, and your decision to honor it rather than cash out. I couldn't cash out. Uzbek law prevented it. You could have fought, hired lawyers, challenged the cultural property claims. Sarah leaned forward. Why didn't you? Mira thought about it. Because Parvin didn't fight to own this place. She fought to protect it. I'm just finishing what she started. That answer became the documentary's central thesis. The film was titled The Keeper's Inheritance and premiered at the Tashkent International Film Festival before broadcasting globally. The response was overwhelming. Universities requested copies for their programs. The foundation's website crashed from traffic. Donations poured in from people who wanted to support homeless family programs, moved by the parallel between Mira's past desperation and her current mission. But the most meaningful response came from an unexpected source. 3 months after the documentary aired, Mira received an email from a woman in Oregon named Patricia Hansen. I am Margaret Hansen's niece. Your grandmother and my aunt were sisters. We lost contact with your father's family after he left the U.S. I had no idea Parvin died, or that she'd left property to anyone. I want to tell you about your grandmother. They arranged a video call. Patricia was 78, with white hair and Parvin's eyes. She cried when she saw Mira. You look like her. Exactly like her at your age. Patricia pulled out photo albums, held them up to the camera. This is Parvin in 1975. This is her in 1982. The woman in the photographs was fierce and beautiful. Dark hair, strong features, eyes that suggested she suffered no fools. In several photos, she stood in front of the caravanserai, gesturing at the walls with the intensity of someone making an argument. Patricia's voice was thick with memory. Parvin left America in 1970. She'd married your grandfather, moved to Uzbekistan when it was still Soviet. He died in 1978. Everyone expected her to come home. She refused. Why? Because she'd fallen in love with the Silk Road, with the history. She believed the caravanserais were treasures being destroyed by neglect and Soviet modernization. Patricia wiped her eyes. She wrote to me every month for 30 years. Always the same message: the building matters. Someone needs to protect it. Patricia pulled out letters, read excerpts. Parvin's frustration with Soviet bureaucrats who wanted to demolish the caravanserai. Her joy when Uzbekistan gained independence and she could petition the new government. Her despair when they also refused to protect the site. In her last letter, she wrote, I will die before this building is saved. But I put it in my will for Mira. Maybe the next generation will succeed where I failed. The letter was dated 6 months before Parvin's death. She'd known she was dying. Known Mira wouldn't want the inheritance. Left it anyway, because hope was better than certainty of failure. Patricia sent copies of everything. Photographs, letters, documents that trace Parvin's 20-year fight. Mira had them translated, archived, incorporated into the museum's permanent collection. The Parvin Khan exhibit opened on the 2nd anniversary of Mira's arrival. It occupied 3 rooms in the restored caravanserai. Photographs showing Parvin at different ages. Letters she'd written to officials, to family, to historians who might listen. The petition she'd filed with UNESCO in 2001 requesting World Heritage status, denied because the building was too deteriorated. The centerpiece was a video interview Parvin had done with a local television station in 2018. She was 77, her health failing, but her conviction absolute. This building survived Mongol invasions, earthquakes, Soviet collectivization. It will survive neglect if someone protects it. Her Uzbek was fluent, her gesture emphatic. I will not see it saved in my lifetime, but I believe someone will. Because truth waits. History waits. This building will wait until the right person arrives. Mira watched the interview with Layla. both of them understanding that Parvin had been speaking to them across time, that the right person hadn't been someone with resources or connections, but someone desperate enough to accept what others rejected. The exhibit's final room contained Myra's story, the eviction notice from Phoenix, Layla's backpack with labeled rocks, the photographs from their first night at the Caravanserai, the contract she'd signed with Rahimov, and on the wall, text that Sarah Chun had written for the documentary. Parvin Khan fought alone for a building nobody valued. Her granddaughter inherited that fight when she had nothing left to lose. Together, across death and time, they proved that persistence outlasts mockery. Visitors wept in that room. Mira had seen it happen repeatedly. People who understood the gap between how the world measures value and what actually matters. The foundation's impact grew beyond initial projections. By the third year, they'd helped 847 families transition from homelessness to stability. The job training programs had a 73% placement rate. The childcare subsidies enabled 214 single mothers to return to work. Mira testified before the Uzbek parliament about expanding the programs nationally. She spoke in careful Uzbek, learned through 3 years of immersion and desperation. The parliament approved a matching grant. For every dollar the foundation spent on homeless support, the government contributed 50 cents. The decision made national news. The president referenced it in a speech about social progress. But the moment that mattered to Mira came after the vote, when a parliament member approached her in the hallway. "My sister was homeless. Your program housed her. She has a job now. Her children are in school." The woman's voice broke. "You didn't just help her. You saved her life." That night, Mira called the Tashkent Housing Center, asked to speak to Gulnara, the woman she'd met 3 years earlier. Gulnara answered in confident Uzbek, then switched to English when she recognized Myra's voice. "Director Khan, I have good news. I got the accounting position. I start Monday." They'd worked together for 18 months. Gulnara completing training while living in the center. Mira writing recommendations, making calls to potential employers. The job was entry-level, but it came with benefits and the possibility of advancement. "I'm so proud of you. I'm proud of me too." Gulnara laughed. 3 years ago, I was sleeping in a bus station. Now I'm an accountant. My children have stability. We have an apartment. After they hung up, Mira sat in the office that had been created from one of the restored Caravanserai rooms. The walls were 800 years old. The desk was modern. The contrast felt appropriate. History and progress occupying the same space. Layla appeared in the doorway. 12 now, tall and confident in ways that made Myra's chest tight. "Mom, Dr. Osmanova wants to know if we can have dinner with her tomorrow. She found something in the archives she wants to show us." They met at Osmanova's apartment in Marjolin. The historian had aged well over 3 years, her initial professional distance replaced by friendship forged through shared work. She served plav and told stories about her own grandmother while they ate. After dinner, she produced a document, old paper, carefully preserved in archival plastic. "I found this in the Bokhara State Archives. It's a letter from Kadadat Ibn Mahmud to his son, written in 1388. She translated the Persian script. "My son, I have sealed our finest goods in the Fergana Caravanserai, the tribute for Timur, and our personal reserves both. I trust the building's security more than any vault in Samarkand. The stones will keep our wealth until we retrieve it next spring." Osmanova looked up. He never retrieved it. Records show Kadadat died in the winter of 1388 to 1389, somewhere between Kashgar and Samarkand. His son inherited the business, but apparently didn't know about the Fergana cash. "So it sat there for 600 years, Layla said. "Longer. His son would have died around 1420. After that, knowledge of the cash was lost. The building became just another abandoned caravanserai." Osmanova smiled, "Until Parvin recognized its value. And you arrived desperate enough to claim it." The letter went into the museum archive. Another piece of the puzzle explaining how a fortune remained hidden while empires rose and fell around it. But Osmanova had more to share. "I've been contacted by the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg. They want to create a permanent Silk Road exhibit. They're offering $90 million for a 20-year loan of the complete spice collection. The number had stopped shocking Mira. The foundation's endowment had grown to $240 million through careful investment and museum contracts. They could fund homeless programs across Central Asia for decades. What do you think? Mira asked. I think Parvin would approve. The collection tells a story that deserves the widest possible audience. Osmanova paused. But there's a condition. The Hermitage wants you to consult on the exhibit. They want Parvin's story told alongside the artifacts. Why me? Because you're the keeper, the one who finished what she started. Osmanova's expression was gentle. You've earned the right to protect how this story is told. Mira accepted. The consulting contract required 2 trips to St. Petersburg over 18 months. She brought Layla, turning the work into education. They toured the Winter Palace, watched the Hermitage team design display cases that would preserve the spices for another century, reviewed text panels that explained Silk Road trade networks. The exhibit opened in 2027 to international acclaim. The Keeper's Cache, Silk Road Treasures from Uzbekistan, drew 300,000 visitors in the first 6 months. The reviews praised the storytelling as much as the artifacts. The Guardian wrote, the exhibit succeeds because it refuses to separate treasure from human cost. Parvin Khan's 20-year fight is given equal weight to the medieval merchants who created the cache. The result is history that feels alive rather than archived. But the moment that validated everything came from an unexpected source. 5 years after Mira signed the foundation agreement, she received an email from her former landlord in Phoenix. I saw the documentary. I'm the one who evicted you. I want to apologize. I didn't know your circumstances. I was following policy, but I should have shown compassion. I'm sorry. The apology should have felt triumphant. Instead, Mira felt only the weight of understanding how close she'd come to a different ending. If the eviction had come a week earlier, she might not have received Farah's call. If she'd had any other option, she wouldn't have come to Uzbekistan. She wrote back, you did me a favor. The eviction forced me to accept an inheritance I would have rejected otherwise. Sometimes the worst moments create the best outcomes. The landlord's response came within an hour. I've started a housing assistance fund for tenants facing eviction. Small loans, payment plans, resources for finding shelter. It's my way of trying to prevent what happened to you from happening to others. Mira donated $50,000 to the fund. The irony wasn't lost on her. Money from a condemned building in Uzbekistan helping prevent homelessness in Arizona. The foundation's 5th anniversary celebration was held at the Caravan. 500 people attended. Government officials, museum directors, families who'd been helped by the housing programs, historians who'd spent years studying the spice collection. Rahimov gave a speech about cultural preservation. Dr. Osmanova presented new research about Kadadid's trade network. Alisher detailed the foundation's financial growth and program expansion. But the speech that mattered came from Gulnara. She stood at a podium in the courtyard, wearing professional clothes, confident in ways that hadn't existed when they first met. 5 years ago, I had nothing. No home, no job, no hope. The Parvin Khan Foundation gave me all 3. Her voice carried across the courtyard. But more than that, it gave me dignity. The staff treated me like a person, not a problem. They believed I could succeed when I didn't believe it myself. She looked at Mira. Director Khan tells people she was like us. Homeless, desperate, afraid. People think she's being humble. But it's true. She knows what it feels like to have the world close every door. That's why the foundation works. Because it's run by someone who remembers. The applause lasted 3 minutes. Mira wiped tears, embarrassed by the attention, but understanding why it mattered. The foundation wasn't charity from distance. It was solidarity from experience. After the speeches, Mira walked the courtyard with Layla. The restoration was complete now. The building looked as it might have in 1380. Tile work in geometric patterns. Painted ceilings showing astronomical charts. Gardens with roses and pomegranates. But they preserved the damaged sections too. One wall intentionally left showing earthquake cracks. A room maintained in its pre-restoration state. evidence that the building had survived not through perfection, but through resilience. Layla stopped at the vault entrance, now covered with protective glass that allowed visitors to see the storage system without disturbing it. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't found the spices? Every day, would we have stayed? Mira considered. I don't know. We had nowhere else to go. Maybe we would have found another way. Or maybe we would have ended up homeless again. Maybe. Mira pulled her daughter close. But we didn't. That's what matters. They stood together, looking down at the vault that had changed everything. The space where ceramic jars had waited 7 centuries for someone desperate enough to claim the building that protected them. Patricia, Parvin's niece, had traveled from Oregon for the anniversary. She was 83 now, moving slowly but determined to see what her sister's legacy had become. Mira showed her through the museum, watching the older woman's tears as she recognized Parvin in every preserved letter, every photograph, every detail of the fight that had consumed 20 years. In the Parvin Kahn exhibit, Patricia stopped at the video interview. Watch her sister speak about truth and patience and buildings that wait. When finished, she turned to Mira. She knew you'd come. I don't know how, but she knew. How could she have known? I didn't even know I existed to her. Parvin always said the building would choose its keeper, that it would wait for someone who needed it as much as it needed protecting. Patricia touched the screen where her sister's face was frozen mid-gesture. You needed shelter. The building needed someone who understood desperation. It was a fair exchange. That night, alone in her quarters, Mira pulled out the box she'd carried from Phoenix. Layla's rocks, each one still labeled with careful handwriting. Phoenix City Park, March 2022. Roosevelt Street, May 2022. Morrison's Diner Alley, September 2022. Small stones from places where they'd been homeless. Carried across continents because Layla believed every rock told a story about where you'd been. Mira added a new stone to the collection. Dark basalt from the Fergana Mountains, collected from the Caravanserai courtyard. She labeled it in Layla's style. Parvin Kahn Memorial Caravanserai, October 2027. Home. The foundation's work expanded into unexpected areas. Educational programs about Silk Road history. Scholarships for students studying archaeology or preservation. Partnerships with other Central Asian nations to protect endangered historical sites. But the core mission remained homeless support. By the 7th year, the programs had helped 2,847 families across Uzbekistan. The government had adopted the model nationally, crediting the foundation with pioneering approaches that treated homelessness as solvable rather than inevitable. Mira was invited to speak at international conferences about sustainable philanthropy. She always told the same story. The eviction notice, the condemned building, the desperation that looked like a mistake until it revealed itself as destiny. I inherited a problem, she would say, but the problem contained a solution. Not just for me, but for thousands of people who needed someone to remember what homelessness feels like. At a UN conference in Geneva, a delegate from Sweden asked, "What would you tell your past self? The woman sleeping in alleys with her daughter?" Mira thought carefully. I'd tell her to trust that desperation can transform into purpose. That having nothing means you're free to accept what others reject. That the inheritance isn't the treasure, it's the responsibility to use it well. The answer became a viral quote, shared across social media in dozens of languages. People resonated with the idea that disasters could become doorways if you were desperate enough to walk through them. But privately, Mira wondered if she'd tell her past self anything at all. Knowledge might have prevented the journey. She might have refused the inheritance, might have found some other solution, might have missed the transformation that came from accepting what seemed like the worst possible option. Layla graduated from the Marjolin International School at 17, fluent in 4 languages, with scholarship offers from universities across Europe and Central Asia. She chose Tashkent State University's archaeology program. I want to study caravanserais, she told Mira. There are dozens across Uzbekistan. Most are in worse shape than ours was. Maybe I can help protect them. The decision felt like Parvin reaching across another generation. The fight continuing through someone who'd grown up understanding why it mattered. On Layla's first day of university, Mira returned to the corner structure where they'd slept that first night. It was maintained as a memorial now. The textiles under glass. Parvin's carved message preserved. A plaque explaining how desperation and inheritance had converged in this space. But Mira had added something new. A second plaque, smaller, mounted at child height. Layla's words from that first morning, engraved in Uzbek and English. "It's really old, Mom." Below it, Mira's response, "It is, but it's ours." The simplicity captured everything that followed. A child's observation and a mother's acceptance. The beginning of a story that had transformed ruin into salvation. Mira sat on the floor where they'd slept, back against the stone wall that had stood for 8 centuries. The building held sounds from outside. Tourists in the courtyard, staff preparing for the day, the distant call to prayer from Marjolaine. She thought about the chain of events that led here. Her father's death, leaving her as Parvin's heir. The eviction that made accepting the inheritance necessary. The desperation that looked like a mistake. The nephew's mockery going viral. The first night in the darkness, not knowing if they'd survive. Every piece had been required. Remove any single element and the story changed. Maybe someone else would have discovered the treasure eventually. Maybe the building would have been demolished first. Maybe Parvin's fight would have ended in failure instead of vindication. But this was the story that happened. The one where a homeless single mother fled Phoenix for a condemned building in Uzbekistan. Where mockery transformed into revelation. Where desperation purchased understanding that enabled helping thousands. Where a grandmother's 20-year fight found completion through a granddaughter who inherited nothing but responsibility and turned it into legacy. The museum opened for the day. Mira could hear Dr. Osmanova beginning a tour, her voice carrying across the courtyard as she explained Silk Road trade routes to visitors from Japan. Mira stood, brushed dust from her clothes, prepared to start another day of running a foundation she'd never imagined directing. But before leaving, she touched Parvin's carved message one more time. Parvin was here. 1987. Mira pulled out a small knife, carved carefully beside it. Mira and Layla were here. 2022. We finished what you started. The addition would scandalize the preservation staff. Carving on historical structures violated every protocol. But Mira didn't care. This was testimony, not vandalism. Evidence that Parvin's message had reached across 40 years and 12,000 miles to find the person who needed to receive it. That evening, the foundation board met to discuss expansion into Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Alisher presented financial projections. Rahimov provided political context. Dr. Osmanova detailed historical sites that needed protection. Mira listened, contributed, made decisions that would affect thousands of lives and millions of dollars. The woman who'd counted quarters for bus fare now controlled a foundation with international reach. After the meeting, Alisher approached her. "You've changed." "How?" "When you arrived, you were terrified. Every decision was agony. Now you lead naturally." He smiled. "Parvin would be proud. You never met her. I read her letters. I watched her interviews. I know what she wanted." He gestured at the caravanserai. This, not just the building, but the use. She didn't fight for ownership. She fought for protection. "You've given her both." That night, Mira walked the ramparts, the restored second-story gallery that circled the courtyard. The Fergana Valley spread below, lights from Marjolaine twinkling against dark mountains. Stars overhead, so bright they cast shadows. She thought about Phoenix, about the apartment she'd lost, about the nursing job that had barely sustained them. That life felt theoretical now, like a story about someone else. But she remembered the fear, the particular terror of not knowing where they'd sleep, the shame of being visible in her failure, the weight of Layla's trust that Mira would find a solution even when no solution seemed possible. Those memories kept the foundation honest, prevented distance from creeping in, made sure every program decision was filtered through the question, would this have helped me when I needed it? A shooting star cut across the sky. Mira made no wish. She'd learned that desperation was more powerful than wishing. that sometimes you had to lose everything to be free enough to accept what the universe offered. The inheritance hadn't been the building or the treasure. It had been the opportunity to transform personal disaster into collective salvation, to prove that one person's fight, however lonely and mocked, could matter if someone finished it. Parvin had died believing she'd failed, but her fight had continued through documents and legal claims that brought Mira to Uzbekistan. Her vision had survived through a building that waited for the right keeper. Her stubbornness had preserved something precious until someone desperate enough arrived to protect it. And now her name was spoken daily by people who'd never met her, was written on plaques and programs and buildings, was synonymous with a persistence that outlasted mockery. The call to prayer echoed from Marjolaine. Mira descended from the ramparts, returned to her quarters where Layla was video calling with friends from school. Normal teenage life in an extraordinary setting. Layla waved goodbye to her friends, turned to her mother. Dr. Osmanova says there's a caravanserai near Kujand that's even more damaged than ours was. She thinks we should visit, maybe help protect it. We? The foundation. Me. You. Layla's expression was eager. I can make it my thesis project. Document the structure, develop a preservation plan. Mira saw it clearly. The pattern repeating. Another generation taking up the fight. Another keeper accepting responsibility for stones that needed protection. We'll talk to Osmanova tomorrow. Start planning. That night, Mira dreamed of Parvin, the grandmother she'd met only once, now appearing with the clarity of presence. They stood in the courtyard, not as it was restored, but as it had been that first night. Broken, abandoned, dangerous. Parvin gestured at the ruins. You see problems. I see potential. I saw both. That's why you were the right one. Parvin smiled. I fought alone. You fought with help. That's how it should be. The next generation shouldn't suffer the same way. Layla wants to protect more caravanserais. Good. The fight continues. That's how knowledge stays alive. Mira woke before dawn. The dream felt like more than sleep. Like Parvin reaching across whatever barrier separated life from death to offer approval Mira hadn't known she needed. She rose, dressed, walked to the courtyard as sunrise painted the mountains gold. The building stood exactly as it had for 8 centuries. Patient, resilient, indifferent to human drama, while simultaneously enabling it. The first tour group would arrive in 3 hours. School children from Tashkent learning about Silk Road history. Mira would tell them about merchants and trade routes and ceramic jars filled with treasures. But she'd also tell them about Parvin, about the 20-year fight that looked like failure until it revealed itself as foundation for someone else's success, about inheriting responsibility instead of wealth, about buildings that wait for the right keeper. And she'd tell them about the moment when desperation transformed into purpose, when homelessness became the qualification rather than the disqualification, when having nothing freed her to accept what everyone else had rejected. Because that was the real treasure. Not the spices worth hundreds of millions, but the understanding that disasters could become doorways. That mockery could transform in a monument. That one person's lonely fight could matter if someone finished it. The sun cleared the mountains. Light flooded the courtyard, illuminating stones that had witnessed 8 centuries of sunrise. Mira stood in that light, keeper of her grandmother's inheritance, director of programs helping thousands, mother to a daughter who would continue the fight. The building had chosen well. Parvin had chosen well. And Mira had chosen well when she accepted what looked like the worst possible option and discovered it was exactly what she needed. The mountains remembered. The stones remembered. And now thousands of people would remember too. Not just the treasure, but the keepers who protected it. The women who fought alone and together across time to prove that persistence outlasted mockery. That truth waited. That history waited. That buildings waited until the right person arrived. And when they did, when desperation met destiny in a courtyard built 8 centuries ago, the inheritance revealed itself not as burden, but as blessing. Not as problem, but as purpose. Not as ending, but as beginning. The foundation's 10th anniversary arrived with the kind of fanfare that would have embarrassed Parvin but served the building's legacy. International media descended on Marjolaine. The president of Uzbekistan attended, as did representatives from UNESCO, which had finally granted the Caravanserai World Heritage status, the designation Parvin had fought for and been denied 40 years earlier. Mira stood at the podium in the restored courtyard, now paved with replica 14th-century tiles that archaeologists had painstakingly recreated from fragments. 5,000 people filled the space and spilled out into the surrounding fields. Cameras broadcast the ceremony across Central Asia and beyond. But before she spoke, Mira insisted on one addition to the program. She'd hired a traditional Uzbek musician to perform a song from the Timurid period, something merchants might have heard in this very courtyard 6 centuries ago. The dutar player's voice rose clear and haunting, singing in Persian about travelers seeking shelter, about the kindness of strangers, about roads that led home even when home was impossibly distant. The performance wasn't on the official program. Several government officials looked uncomfortable with the delay. But Mira had learned that authority came not from titles, but from conviction. The song mattered because it connected past to present in ways speeches couldn't. When the final notes faded, Mira began. She spoke in Uzbek. First, 10 years of immersion had made her fluent, though her accent still marked her as foreign. Then she repeated in English for the international audience. 10 years ago, I arrived here with my daughter, fleeing eviction in America. We had 2 suitcases and nowhere else to go. The internet mocked me. Local people thought I was insane. I thought I'd made the worst mistake of my life. She paused, looked at Layla standing in the front row. 22 now, completing her doctorate in archaeological preservation at Tashkent State. Beautiful and confident in ways that made Mira's heart swell. But I'd inherited more than a building. I'd inherited my grandmother's unfinished fight. Parvin Khan spent 20 years being told this structure was worthless. She died before anyone listened. But her persistence created the legal foundation that brought me here. Her stubborn refusal to surrender made this moment possible. On the massive screen behind her, photographs cycled. Parvin in 1987, standing before the ruins. Parvin in 2001, submitting her UNESCO petition. Parvin in 2018, giving her final interview. Her face aging, but her conviction unchanging. The treasure we found wasn't the inheritance. The real inheritance was responsibility, the obligation to finish what she started, to prove that one person fighting alone can matter if someone else is willing to continue the fight. She detailed the foundation's decade of work. For 1,283 families transitioned from homelessness to stability. Job training programs with an 87% placement rate. Educational scholarships for 892 children who'd experienced housing insecurity. Partnerships with 6 Central Asian nations to protect endangered historical sites. We've helped families in Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and Afghanistan. We've restored 12 caravanserais that were slated for demolition. We've created employment for 347 people through the museum and its associated programs. The numbers were impressive, but Mira knew they didn't capture the real impact. The woman in Tashkent who'd gone from homeless to social worker, now helping others the way she'd been helped. The man in Samarkand who'd used job training to start a successful construction business and now employed other formerly homeless people. The children who'd grown up in foundation housing and were now attending university. But statistics don't tell the full story, Mira continued. Behind every number is a person who was told they didn't matter, who was invisible to a world that stepped over them, who was mocked for their circumstances. She looked directly at the camera, knowing her words would reach beyond this audience. I understand that mockery. I lived it. The videos of people laughing at the crazy American woman still exist online. And I'm grateful they do, because they remind me, and hopefully remind others, that what looks like foolishness can be vision waiting to be validated. The crowd erupted in applause. But Mira noticed the people who mattered most, the 37 formerly homeless individuals she'd invited as honored guests. They sat in the front rows wearing nice clothes, many of them accompanied by children who'd been toddlers when their families entered foundation programs and were now teenagers. Their applause was different, not polite or enthusiastic, but profound. The recognition of someone speaking truth they'd lived. After the ceremony, a reception filled the museum's exhibition halls. Dignitaries moved through spaces displaying the spice collection, half of it, anyway. The other half was currently touring museums in Beijing, Paris, and New York, generating revenue that funded expansion into Afghanistan, where civil unrest had created a homelessness crisis. Mira found herself cornered by the deputy director of the World Bank, a woman named Catherine Becky, who'd flown in from Washington specifically for this event. "Your foundation's model is remarkable," Catherine said. "We're interested in replicating it in other post-Soviet nations. Would you consult on program development?" The request was flattering but complicated. Mira had resisted expansion beyond Central Asia, worried that growth would dilute effectiveness. But Catherine made compelling arguments about scalability, about how the foundation's approach, treating homelessness as solvable and involving people with lived experience in program design, could transform policy across multiple nations. "Let me think about it," Mira said. "I'll need to discuss with my board." Catherine handed her a card. "We're prepared to fund a pilot program. 3 cities, 3 years, $15 million. Your foundation would maintain operational control." After Catherine moved on, Layla appeared at Mira's elbow. "You're considering it. How do you know?" "Because you didn't say no immediately." He smiled. "It's a good opportunity, but it will change the foundation's character. You'll spend less time in Uzbekistan, more time managing international operations." "That concerns me." "It should. But consider, Parvin fought for one building for 20 years. You've expanded her fight to 6 nations in 10 years. Maybe the next stage is global." He paused. "Or maybe you say no and keep the work focused. Either choice honors her legacy." Mira appreciated that he presented both options without judgment. That was Layla's gift, helping her think through decisions without imposing his preferences. That evening, the formal celebrations ended and a smaller gathering occurred in the corner structure where Mira and Layla had slept that first night. 30 people, foundation staff, board members, historians who'd supported the work, and a handful of program participants who'd become friends. They sat on cushions arranged in a circle, sharing food and conversation in the intimate space where everything had begun. Patricia, Parvin's niece, had made the journey from Oregon again despite her 88 years. She sat beside Mira, occasionally translating when the conversation shifted fully into Uzbek. Rustam stood to speak, his beard now fully gray, his bearing that of someone who'd watched the impossible become ordinary. 10 years ago, I thought you were foolish. I told my wife the American woman would leave within a month. I was wrong about everything." His wife, Zarina, added in Uzbek that Patricia translated. "She said you had your grandmother's stubbornness. I said stubbornness wasn't enough. But maybe stubbornness plus desperation equals transformation." Laughter rippled through the group. Then Gulnara stood. She was a different person than the hollow-eyed woman Mira had met at the Tashkent Housing Center 9 years ago. Confident, well-dressed, carrying herself with the assurance of someone who'd rebuilt their life from nothing. "Director Kahn asked us to call her Mira, but I still can't," Gulnara said in fluent English. "Because Mira is a friend. Director Kahn is the person who saved my life, who gave me more than shelter. She gave me belief that I could succeed." Gulnara's voice thickened. "My oldest daughter graduated university last month. My middle son is in his 2nd year. My youngest just started high school. They will never know homelessness. That gift comes from one woman who remembered what it felt like to have nothing." She pulled out a small object wrapped in silk, handed it to Mira. "This is from all of us, the families you've helped. We commissioned it together." Mira unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a carved wooden box, maybe 6 inches square, with intricate geometric patterns. She opened it. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a small ceramic jar identical to the ones that had contained the spice treasure. But this one was new, created by a master potter in Rishton. Open it, Gulnara urged. Inside the jar were folded papers. Hundreds of them, tiny scrolls tied with thread. Mira unfolded one. It was a message written in a child's handwriting. Thank you for helping my mom. Now we have a home. Aziz, age 8, inch another. I have a job because of your program. My children are safe. Farida, another. You showed me that homeless doesn't mean hopeless. Rustam, a different Rustam, not the historian. There are 783 messages, Gulnara explained. One from every adult and child your programs have helped we could locate. We wanted you to have something worth more than spices. Myra's composure, maintained through the day's formal ceremonies, finally cracked. She wept openly while the people around her, some of whom had been strangers a decade ago, moved closer in silent support. Layla, who'd been mostly quiet during the evening, spoke finally. When I was 9, I thought we'd made a terrible mistake coming here. I was scared every day for months. But then I watched my mom choose to stay, to fight for this building and what it could become. She taught me that family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose to protect. She looked around the circle. Grandma Parvin chose this building. Mom chose to finish that fight, and now I'm choosing to continue it. Not just here, but at 11 other sites across Central Asia where I'm applying the preservation techniques we've developed. Mira hadn't known Layla was expanding beyond the Kujin project. Her daughter continued. 3 of those caravanserais are in Afghanistan. The security situation is complicated, but the buildings are even more endangered than this one was. If we don't act now, they'll be destroyed. The room fell silent. Afghanistan represented risk that made Uzbekistan look safe by comparison. But it also represented the logical extension of Parvin's vision, that historical preservation mattered regardless of political complications. Dr. Osmanova spoke carefully. That's dangerous work. So was coming here when everyone said the building was worthless, Layla countered. Mom took that risk. I'm taking this one. Mira met her daughter's eyes, saw Parvin's determination reflected across 3 generations, felt the weight of inheritance, not treasure, but the obligation to fight for what mattered despite cost. We'll discuss security protocols, Mira said finally, and funding, and partnerships with Afghan preservation societies. But, she paused, yes. If the buildings can be saved, we try. The gathering continued late into the night. People sharing stories, making plans, weaving connections that transformed colleagues into family. This was the real inheritance, not the building or the treasure, but the community that formed around shared purpose. Near midnight, after others had left, Mira walked the courtyard alone. The restored caravanserai glowed softly under lights designed to mimic moonlight. Tourists were gone. Staff had retired. The space held the particular silence of places where significant things had occurred. She stood at the vault entrance, looking down through protective glass at the space where ceramic jars had waited 7 centuries. The vault was empty now, the spices distributed to museums worldwide, generating revenue that funded the work. But the emptiness felt appropriate. The treasure's purpose had been fulfilled. Patricia appeared beside her, moving slowly but determinedly. I'm leaving tomorrow. Back to Oregon. I probably won't make another trip. Don't say that. I'm 88. Realistic, not pessimistic. Patricia smiled. But I needed to see this. To know that Parvin's fight mattered. It did. It does. She would have loved you, you know. Would have seen herself in your stubbornness. Patricia touched Myra's arm. Thank you for finishing what she started. Thank you for making her name mean something beyond the family who remembered her. After Patricia left, Mira remained in the courtyard. Above, stars wheeled in patterns that had guided Silk Road travelers for millennia. The same stars Parvin had seen during her lonely fight. The same stars that would watch whatever came next. Mira thought about Catherine Becky's proposal, about Layla's Afghan plans, about the foundation expanding beyond what she'd imagined possible, about the responsibility that came with success, the obligation to help more people, protect more sites, extend the fight into new territories. It was terrifying, but then Everything worthwhile had been terrifying. Coming to Uzbekistan, accepting the building, staying when mockery transformed into attention, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Fear, she'd learned, was just information. It told you the stakes mattered. What you did with that information determined whether fear became paralysis or motivation. She pulled out her phone, opened her email, wrote to Catherine, "Let's discuss the pilot program. I'm interested." Then she wrote to the board, "Tomorrow's meeting agenda, expansion into Afghanistan. Security assessment required." The messages sent, Mira returned to her quarters. Layla was still awake, reading archaeological journals by lamplight that glowed warm against ancient stone walls. "I heard you pacing in the courtyard," Layla said without looking up. "Thinking about next steps. You're going to say yes to everything, aren't you? The World Bank program. My Afghan projects. All of it." "Probably." Mira sat on the edge of Layla's bed. "Is that crazy?" "Definitely. But Grandma Parvin was crazy too. So were you when you came here." Layla set down her journal. "Maybe our family's inheritance is choosing impossible fights and winning them anyway." Mira laughed, the sound carrying relief and recognition both. "Maybe it is." They sat together in comfortable silence, mother and daughter, keepers of a legacy neither had chosen but both had accepted. Outside, the caravanserai stood as it had for 8 centuries, patient and permanent, waiting for whatever the next century would bring. The mountains remembered, the stones remembered, and now the world would remember too. Not just the treasure, but the women who'd fought across generations to protect what others dismissed. That was the real inheritance. Not wealth measured in currency, but purpose measured in lives changed. Not treasure buried in vaults, but legacy written in the stories of thousands who'd been helped by one woman's refusal to let her grandmother's fight end in failure. The building had chosen well, and Mira had chosen well when she'd accepted the inheritance that everyone said was worthless. Some things, she'd learned, only revealed their value to people desperate enough to claim them. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.